Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So today we're going to enter into the 18th chapter of Gita. This is the crescendo, the conclusion, the wrap-up, the summary. It is where Krishna brings it all together and leaves Arjuna in the position of being ready to take the next action. So this will be the conclusion of the revelation of the Gita. Arjuna has come out of dejection and met the soul. He has found the deep, quiet peace of that inner quality of the Atman. He's tasted the Brahman, the I am thatness. He's felt the vast, expanded awareness of the Brahman. He's gone to the ecstasies and the agonies, the raptures of the middle kingdom, of all the great beings and gods, and completed in merger. And he has met the absolute, that which is beyond this entire creation, timeless, eternal, the source of all existence, the Sat. And now he's coming back. He's coming back with the task that was before him at the beginning of this chapter. And this chapter summarizes the beginning of this Gita. This particular chapter summarizes everything that has been revealed up to now and puts it in the context of what's next. So what's before it is when you have reached or attained these various states, you have a perspective that's no longer human. You see things from such a broad perspective that now is a possibility to take effective action in the world. Because you have available to you the understanding of the mechanisms, of the structures, of the gunas, of the human system, of the conditions, the conditionings that have shaped everything up to this point. And such a being has this great capacity for action. So this is the point of the Gita, because in this era, in this time, an intervention is being done in the collective consciousness. And it cannot be done within the collective consciousness. It has to be done from without of the collective consciousness. Because a direction is a redirection of the momentum, the inertia, the huge quantum of consequences of the collective humanity is like a vast ship. To change the direction of a vast ship, you have to have a rudder. You actually have to have a rudder on the rudder. You have to know the point where the action can make the difference. You have to have that particular kind of capacity and insight. Then you have to have the ability to take the action. And all of this isn't done through the individual. It's done through the intuition, to the self-giving, the willing sacrifice. To be an instrument or a channel, to express that original intent, that evolutionary purpose into your life. So this is perhaps the longest chapter, or at least the second longest. The other longest chapter was the chapter 2, the beginning of the Gita, where the teaching started. So we're going to see how far we can get today. It'll definitely take 2 sessions. Okay, let's begin.
Chapter 18, Moksha Yoga, the Yoga of Liberation. Arjuna said, O mighty armed, O Krishna, I want to know the truth about sannyasa and tyaga, and also the difference between the two. The Blessed Lord said, sages say that the capacity to withdraw from desire-prompted actions is sannyasa, and wise men declare that giving up the results of all action is tyaga.
Okay. So Arjuna is still got questions. He's stepping out of this wonderful explorative arena of consciousness, and now ready to enter into the field of action. And it is a bit of an echo of chapter 3, where Arjuna said, Krishna, if you know that knowledge is superior to action, then why do you urge me to do this terrible action? So we're back to the same reluctance. He's entering back into his human nature. He's entering back into the vehicle in which divine can manifest through him. He cannot bypass his nature. He has to take that into account. And his nature is what's rising up and saying, okay, so say again, what is it you want me to do? And explain to me what's wrong with sannyasa, withdrawing consent to take action. That was my original idea. I thought it was a good idea at the time, living in the forest. Sounds like a good plan. Versus doing this thing. How can you possibly win? How can it possibly, even if you won, so what? In the universal consequences of things. He's still struggling with his own part of himself that is now shifting gears, coming out of this vast arena, preparatory arena, and into the arena of this dimension, where the problem lies, where the obscurity lies, where the Dharma lies, in this field of Kurukshetra. Something has to be battled out, something devastating at times. Glorious, perhaps. Crushing, defeating. And no certainty of success. And it's a lot of work, killing all these people. More likely you're going to get hurt. So these are reasonable, right, questions. You can tell we're entering back into the mind. We're back, although it's the illumined mind, we're entering back into the vehicle in which we started from. And now, all this experience and all this awareness is going to be tested. It's going to be demonstrated. It's going to encounter an opportunity to test its reality in this dimension. And this says something about the nature of the spiritual path. Is that really when it comes down to, nothing true and stable can come unless we bring it fully into the body, into the personality, into the vital, into the mental. So it's a lived state of consciousness. And that, of course, is where all the work is. So, again, this is the two paths. The paths that started out at the beginning of the Gita, which was the path of knowledge, and the path of action. In the beginning of the Gita, it was knowledge and action. The path of love, devotion didn't come until after the 7th chapter. After the 8th chapter, actually. So now it's down to the same issues. A sannyasi withdraws consent for the action. He withdraws from taking the action. A tyagi is a karmi yogi. One who takes the action but is detached from the outcome. They're both forms of renunciation. Being detached from the outcome means no matter how much effort you apply, it could fail. You could be devastated. You could be worse off. Or you could be better off. You could be, you could become famous. But in this context, that's not up to us. You have the right to the action, not the fruit thereof. The first revelation of the Gita. detached action. This is where it was going all along. It is the same kind of sannyasi. It's a dynamic expression of sannyasi, of renunciation. It's renunciation in action, rather than static renunciation, where it withdraws. It remains in its original state. This was a revolutionary concept for the time. This idea of being a complete renunciate, to be down to that eternal, unchanging reality in which there is no time, no space, and act from that place. So there are two expressions. One is dynamic, of the same thing. One dynamic, one static. Okay, continue.
Some wise men proclaim that all actions are to be given up, since no action is free from fault, while others say that acts of sacrifice, charity, and austerity should not be given up. Arjuna, listen now to my views on tyaga and sannyasa. Tyaga is of three types: sattwic, rajasic, and tamasic. One should not give up ordained acts of austerity, charity, and sacrifice, since all these actions purify even the wise men. These actions, like all other actions too, should be performed as ordained duties, without attachment and expectation of reward. This is my final opinion.
Okay. So Krishna has an investment. His investment is he's come to intervene in the collective consciousness. But he can't do it. He needs channels. He needs instruments to do it. He needs Arjunas to do it. So in the vast infinity, if you take action or not take action makes no difference. But relative to this situation, yes, it does. So it's my opinion that tyaga is the right thing to do. How I used to read this. So when did you get an opinion? You've never had an opinion, my view up to now. How come now you've got an opinion? What's different than all the rest of it? Everything else was revelation. You know? So he's got investment in this coming out a certain way, right? He then, though, continues on. And he explains that the tyaga has three types. That even the tyaga, that means the action where you detach from the outcome, where you let go of the outcome, can be sattwic, rajasic, and tamasic. It doesn't seem a tamasic person could be, or a rajasic person certainly, could be detached from the outcome. So it's not an ordinary sattva, rajas, or tamas. It's a mobilization of the gunas for the purpose of manifesting the divine from one who carries that kind of authority, from one who has gone beyond the three gunas. It shows that any one of these actions may be necessary for the purpose to be fulfilled. Sattvic, rajasic, tamasic. So it could be destructive action. It could be aggressive, assaulting action. Or it could be wise and patient action. Any or all may be required. And then he says something that he had implied in the earlier chapters, 17, around when we were talking about scriptural injunctions. The necessity for steadfastness in acts of sacrifice, charity, and austerity. So this steadfastness is because once you enter into this world and you start manifesting tamasic or rajasic gunas, you have to have a high state of purity to be able to operate in that gross, destructive, chaotic environment. You have to have a poise beyond ordinary in order to take those kinds of action. Because if you're a sattvic person, a rajasic or a tamasic action is repulsive. And if you're a rajasic person, a sattvic action or a rajas action is repulsive. And if you're tamasic action, any other action but tamas is repulsive. So You have to be of a different order than any of those three. And the consequences will come because you're operating in the world of prakriti, of creation, where all actions have consequences. And those consequences will come to that who causes the action, to the vehicle that the action is created by or done by. So a lot of shit will come to you when you start acting shitty. So when things get rough, it will get rough for you. So these acts of sacrifice, charity, and austerity is to keep you in touch with the reality, even amidst the bombardment of a dynamic expression of the kind that Arjuna is now entering into. So this is mature manifestation, where there are not particular rules. It's not about attaining sattva anymore, right? It's not becoming a better person. As a matter of fact, if necessary, you become a worse person. It is no longer bound by ethics or morality. It is beyond those dualities. It is whatever is the most effective way to move forward the consciousness in that moment. That's the trim tab. That's the thing that changes the rudder. And this ruthless willingness to take that action. Now, I'm not going to say that this is something most of you who listen to me and listening to this talk should do. It is rather pointing to what the requirements of the avatar is, the requirements of the manifest realized being is. It's recognizing that it's a complete different set of rules, of criteria. Even these acts of austerity, charity, and sacrifice, again, this purifying, this process of keeping your system pure, you have to be detached from the outcome. Now, of course, this is true everywhere along the journey. As long as we have an investment in the outcome, we are laying claim to the action. And when who's laying claim to the action? It's the ego. As long as once you lay claim to the action, then you are cast into the field of karma. So if you're not constantly practicing acts of sacrifice, charity, and austerity, then you can get overtaken by the consequences of the action. If, however, you're in your state, then no matter what action you take, you're untouched. You're able to take if the action is tamasic or rajasic or sattwic, you remain untouched, unscathed. Okay, let's continue.
Renunciation of obligatory action is not proper. Its abandonment due to blind attachment is tamasic tyaga. Anyone who gives up obligatory action due to the fear of physical discomfort does not get the benefits of tyaga, since such a renunciation is verily rajasic in essence.
Okay. So this again is addressing Arjuna's state, right? He's saying, so what is this about tyaga and sannyasa, right? He's saying, you can't get out of this one. This is an inevitable action. This is the fruit of previous consequences, some of which are yours and much of which isn't. Renouncing obligatory action is due to blind attachment, which is in his case his attachment to the people who he's about to slaughter, the people he's admired and respected, the things that he's been attached to, that he made important, that he clung to, his values, his principles, his ethics, his moralities, his purpose, everything as a human being that he identified with. To not take action for these reasons is tamasic tyaga. Because you're still being coded by the habit of your human life. If you're avoiding the action for fear of pain, or losing your head or your features or your legs, okay, well this just for fear of physical discomfort, is so understated. Shall not get the benefit of the tyaga, since that renunciation is verily rajasic in essence. So it may be neutral, because that's the nature of rajas. Rajas is neutral. The action of rajas does not necessarily lower the consciousness or lift the consciousness. It can be either, or none. But you won't get the ability to manifest if you're not taking the full quantum the full measure of the action required. So it's not enough that you just tokenly do the action, the minimum amount necessary. There has to be vigor, and then the attachment from the outcome. And this vigor action, it's much harder to let go of the doership and of the outcome than in the more limpid or tepid action. So you lose the benefit of the action. It does not perform, it does not allow the Brahman, or the Satchitananda, to manifest in that moment. The action has to be done perfectly for the force of Satchitananda, which is the intervening force into the creation, to have its effect. Okay.
When action is performed for the sake of duty, without any motive and attachment, it becomes sattwic action. A wise man who is established in sattva, who has no hesitation to perform a disagreeable action, nor is attached to an agreeable action, and who is free from confusion, is fit to be called a tyagi.
Okay, this is talking about the right action. This is the sattwic tyaga. This capacity to not have hesitation to perform a disagreeable action. Now, that doesn't mean he's operating in the gunas as sattva. It means he's coming from sattva in his operating in the gunas. So he has clarity, he has detachment, he has the resolve, he has all the qualities needed to manifest in whatever guna is needed at the moment. So he's coming from up. He's taking he's making a sacrifice from this state of awareness that can see through what looks like the error of rajas and tamas to what it is needed at this moment. Destruction is sometimes needed. That's why rajas is there. Tamas is sometimes needed. That's why the body is there. That's why food is there. That's why rest is there. That's what allows for stability, continuity of the form. They each have a role to play. So, but we can look at it into our own lives. This one can very much apply. No hesitation to perform a disagreeable action, nor is attached to agreeable action. Who's free from confusion is fit to be called a tyagi. So there isn't an objection. When I lived in the ashram, I never had a problem with doing tasks in the ashram. But there were some people who would refuse to clean the toilets. For them, that was not, it was too disagreeable. And I noticed that I had no problem cleaning toilets. So I would clean the toilets. So there was something in my nature that didn't have any issue with the difficult or disagreeable action. Now, I thought it was rajas. I thought it was just because I like to do things. But in fact, I didn't have a fussiness about what I did. I could do very difficult action. So this is sattwic, this ability to do actions that are difficult without hesitation. Whatever is needed, to step right into it. Okay, let's continue.
As long as there is identification with the body, one cannot give up actions completely. But when one attains the capacity of renouncing the fruit of action, he is called a true tyagi. Those who have not renounced the fruits of action are subject to 3 types of results, evil, good, and mixed. But for a true tyagi, there is no result whatsoever.
So this is talking about being able to operate in the world of karma. Because inevitably, in the world of karma, it's the world of action. So every action has a consequence. Every action makes a difference. Actions that you take that serve the ego empowers the ego. Actions that take that serves the divine empowers the divine. So these are inevitable consequences of your action. But one who acts from this state of a true tyagi, there is no result whatsoever for the one who's acting, good or bad, or neutral. This finding the perfection in the action, where that when the action is complete, there's no residue. There's no, oh, I could have done that better. Or maybe I should have cut off his other arm. You know, there's no self-questioning. There is this free movement right into the activity without clinging to the outcome. No guilt, no doubt, no recriminations for yourself, no questionings. It's this pure consciousness acting. This is what it's pointing to. And this chapter of manifestation, this is the focus. All actions produce results. We are, you might say that we live in a domain where almost all of what's happening is the consequences of previous action. And these consequences are forcing new actions. So you might say all the consequences, all the effects of previous causes are becoming the cause of new actions, which are creating new effects. So it's a cause and effect reality. So this is the arena by which mankind is stuck. Collective consciousness is stuck. So if you take an action and you step into the machine, you unwittingly feed the machine, then you're not making any difference. You're not intervening. You're not breaking the cycle of the samskaras. You're not breaking the cycle of mankind's evolutionary movement, or the resistance, inertia to that evolutionary movement. If there had been no previous actions, if there was not this quantum of consequences that we live in and our bodies are a field of, then if we thought something, it would happen. If we imagined something, it would become real. There would be no gap between what we would want and having and getting it. There would be instantaneous fulfillment. It's because of the inertia that there's all these consequences that need to be worked out that your imagination, your desire, your intent is not apparent. It's there. It's in the works. You just have to wait 5 days, 10 days, 10 years, 10,000 years for it to show up. This is the nature of action in this arena. We have our goodwill and our good intent, but the possibility of it actually happening is really up to forces outside of ourselves. Because we're living in this field, a momentum, of a collective momentum, that our action will have an effect, but it will not necessarily be apparent. Okay, let's continue.
Arjuna, according to the Vedas, there are 5 factors behind the complete accomplishment of any action: the seed of action, the doer, the various organs of action, the various efforts, and destiny. These are the 5 factors that are behind the performance of an action. Whatever may be the nature of an action that human beings perform, whether physical, mental, or verbal, whether right or wrong, the above 5 factors are behind the accomplishments of actions.
So this is simply describing the predicament you find yourself in. So whenever you take any action, let's not take just random little, eating breakfast actions, but let's say any purposeful action, any intentional action. It's occurring within a realm of possibilities. Those possibilities may be narrow or expanded. And within those possibilities, there are some factors. There is time, there is the space, the place, the circumstances. There is the capacity of the person taking the action. There is the type of actions they actually take, the efforts they actually take. There are the various instruments, the means of the action. For example, writing a book versus speaking before an audience versus beating up your neighbor. These are just different expressions. So this is the content in which actions always arise. Now, how do we get anything done at all? Well, because we're born into a collective agreement. And what happens is the collective agreement takes a tendency for some actions to work more effectively because in the past, previous people have continuously made sacrifices for those things to happen. For example, we can walk outside of this building, get into our cars. More likely, when we turn the key on, the car will start, and then we can drive off to wherever we wanted to go. How did that immediacy happen? How did that happen if what I'm describing is true? It's happened because there has been the sacrifice of thousands, maybe millions of people in order for that to happen over long periods of time so that that possibility is now here. And of course, there was also the possibility that you turn the key on and nothing happens. And if you're really invested in getting somewhere, then you'll find out how attached to the outcome you are. So we take some things can be done. So it has something, it's indicating, it's pointing to how do you create a new possibility? What is the means by which we bring forward into this huge domain of karma and samskaras and consequences? How do we bring forward something new or truer? Understanding these principles is the way one who has come to this state can begin to manifest. For example, as many of you know, Werner Erhard was my teacher at one point, and he would talk about an idea whose time has come. And his strategy wasn't that the time had come, but how to make an idea such that its time had come. It is how to create something out of nothing, and how to create a reality around it, and to open up that space and that possibility. So this is what this is pointing to. In my teachings, I say, well, the intent is the most important thing. The pure intent. The intent that's aligned with the original intent, the evolutionary purpose. When you have set an intent, when you have created a context, then the actions you take within that context, the sacrifices you make within that context, the effort you make within that context, empowers it, brings forward that possibility, even if the action fails, even if it proved to be wrong. It opens up the possibility. If you want to send a rocket to the moon back in the 60s, what happened a lot of the time was it didn't get there. It couldn't get enough power, enough juice. Things kept falling apart and breaking down and blowing up. So that's also what was necessary in order to get a rocket on the moon. So it's the nature of understanding the nature of the creation, the nature of how things work. This is what we're now getting down to. Okay?
However, due to ignorance and unrefined intelligence, some people are unable to see this truth and consider the self to be the doer. One whose mind is not clouded with the sense of I-ness and whose intellect is free from material coatings does not really kill anyone, nor is he bound by his actions. even if he actually kills all creatures. There are three impulses for action: the knowledge, the knower, and the process of knowing. Likewise, the basis of action is also threefold: the instrument, the action, and the doer.
Okay, well, there's a lot of material. This chapter has a lot of information, a lot of materials. We're not possibly going to be able to go into all of it, but we'll just point out bits and pieces of it so you can understand. To imagine an intent aligned with the original intent, to find within yourself that impulse, is to recognize that there is something in that consciousness that is aligned with truth. Then that impulse that comes is unquestioned. It's unquestioned in its authority. It's unquestioning. It comes forward with you as the action that needs to be taken. That's what a truth action is. It's an immediate response to the necessity of the situation that's aligned with truth. Aligned with truth. That may include love, that may include violence, that may include rejection, it may include destruction. But it comes spontaneously from this place of the attainment. Therefore, there's not a questioning, at least at the time of the action. At the time of the action, it's true, be it for self-giving, be it for being angry. If it comes out in this way, and we don't get attached to it, if we don't say, what did I just do? If we just recognize that what's come through us is necessary in the moment that's arising, then that action could be fully expressed. Then with that would be the recognition that the consequences aren't yours either. The impulse didn't come from you. The modality, the way it manifested itself, didn't come from you. And therefore the consequences aren't yours. So now this is a little tricky conversation. Because if you're looking at a human being who can be motivated by desire or fear or cravings or resentment or hatred or bigotry or judgment, then what comes through will be a pure expression of those things. It won't be serving any evolutionary purpose. It'll be serving the consequences of the existing condition that mankind finds themselves in. But one who has come to the state of truth, there is a place, a period, where they become sanctioned, you might say. Divine, they become instruments of the divine. And that no matter what action they take, the highest good gets manifested. No matter what it appears like, the higher good gets manifested. I know this may be contradictory, and for all our moral training and our good yogis, all our good yogi actions, where we avoid the negative actions and the selfish actions and we take the positive actions, it's very hard to see this. But I saw this in my teacher. I saw he was irascible, unpredictable, manipulative, lying, conning, two-faced, and tremendous things happened. It was not apparent to me that this was what I would call conducive human behavior, right? Because I'm raised in a more moral and ethical culture. We're more educated. We're not so primitive. But the bottom line of it, what was manifesting was truth consciousness. People were having experiences left and right. People were getting in touch with their unconsciousness when he yelled at them, when he chased them around the ashram, scaring them off, when he would throw them out. People were making evolutionary changes. He was just acting. I remember one day his daughter ran away, and he became like a madman, whirling around, took one of the cars. He couldn't drive. He can't drive worth shit. And he took one of the Indian cars and just grind the gears and threw open the gate and went onto the road. And, I mean, we didn't think he would live, looking to find his daughter. But it was the expression of that full, total throwing of himself into the situation, that you had to say, wow, what was that? I never seen him upset about his kids. I mean, he was away from his family for 7 years. Didn't have anything to do with them. It didn't make any sense at all why he would do that. But what happened was he intervened in the life of his daughter, and he demonstrated something that showed a complete willingness to take the action, and he had no inclination to justify or rationalize his misbehavior. He questioned it. He said, I was surprised. I don't have these things. How did that happen? But there was no guilt, no, I shouldn't act like this. I'm a guru. I'm trying to, he didn't have anything like that. He had this freedom. Freedom. He wasn't run by ethics and morality. So I saw it again and again. I saw this aliveness. I saw this power. I saw this force. And I'm saying, what is that? Things didn't happen linearly around him. If a project was started, the project usually more times than not collapsed. But all kinds of other things happened from different areas that came into existence. I remember when I ran my architectural business, and there was a lot of pressure and there was a lot of marketing. And what I've noticed is all the work I did to marketing out to the world, to do community service, to get involved in whatever, never produced result. It always came from left field. It always came from some other place. It was never where I was putting my attention. And I was wondering, how does that work? So I got, I just have to apply the effort. It doesn't have to really produce any result. I just have to apply the effort of marketing. Even if it costs money and doesn't work and fails and so on and so forth, that's what's needed. It's the sacrifice. It's so counterintuitive, I know. I'm an architect, right? You do things sequentially, right? You build things and you have put things in order. Different set of rules. It has something to do with where you come from. What is your intention? What's the context? Then what the form of the action is secondary. If you look at a battlefield, if you look at an arena where someone's intervening aggressively in a situation like a battlefield, it's not linear. It's chaotic. It's coming from all directions. How do you move in that arena? You can't be attached to the action. You can't be clinging to the outcome. You can't be recriminating yourself or judging yourself or condemning yourself. You have to do what is necessary with what is arising. This is where war and battle does have a usefulness in terms of understanding the kind of vigorous action that may at times be required. So there's so much more we can speak of this, and perhaps sometime I will go back here and expand on these. But we're not going to be able to do that in this revelation. So we'll just point to these things, and we'll work with what we can in the time frame we have. So one thing I do want to address, this 3 impulses for action in verse 640. Knowledge, the knower, and the process of knowing. Knowledge is jnana. Jnana is actually, in the Gita, it is what you might call the striving of consciousness to know itself. It is the evolutionary impulse. So the impulse for action is the knower, that which is seeking to be known, and the process of knowing. That can be experience, the experiencer, and that which would be experienced, and the process of experiencing. These are the 3 impulses. So what can happen? It is the doer, the process of doing, and the result. So these are the three principles, motives of action. If you are coming from the doer, I am doing this, then you eat the consequences of the action. If you come from not getting invested or lost or in reaction to the process of doing, you then eat the consequence of the action. And if you get vested in the outcome, if you say, no, this isn't what I wanted, or this is what I wanted, or I really like what I did, I really hate what happened, then you eat the consequences of the action. Even if the action was expressed in a very quick moment, what does need to be done? Taking the action, getting it done. And it had been done without thought, without doership, without attachment to the process or thinking of the consequences. Afterwards, you can go back and lay claim to any one of those three. Say, what did I just do? Why did I do that? And take on the consequences of the action. See how tricky this is? You have to be a free channel, unbound, unlimited, in order to be able to follow the impulse of action such that divine can manifest itself perfectly through you. Then it also says the instrument, the action, and the doer. So basically that has to do with the body. The doer is the body. The action is sattva, rajas, or tamas. And the instrument is means. It could be thought. It could be the speech. It could be physical action. These are the means by which consciousness instrumentally enters into the creation. Okay, let's continue.
It is said that knowledge, action, and the doer are of three types. Know these from me. The knowledge by which a person is able to know that the same imperishable being resides in every form as an undivided divine presence is called sattwic knowledge. But that knowledge by which man perceives the presence of many beings as different from each other is rajasic knowledge. That knowledge is tamasic, which causes one to cling to one form, as if it were the whole, and is devoid of reasoning and truth, and is of little value.
Okay. So now this is the beginning of a series of revelations of the nature of the condition that you find yourself in. So what Krishna is doing is taking different areas of life and putting them into this context of sattva, rajas, or tamas. So that's where we'll be going for the next few verses. Now this is mostly informative. For those of you who were introduced to the Gita in the 14th chapter, you can, both in the 17th chapter before this one, and in this chapter, it will really flesh out what is sattva, what is rajas, what is tamas in these different areas. So it's a body of information by which you can see the nature of action and the conditions in which these three gunas are working. So right now he's describing the kinds of knowledge. He's knowledge, action, and doer. So over these next verses, he's going to describe the sattva, rajas, and tamas of knowledge, the sattva, rajas, tamas of action, and sattva, tamas, and rajas of the doer. Okay, let's continue.
An action that is ordained, free from attachment, done without attraction or repulsion, and is free from result motive, is called sattwic action. But the action that is prompted by desire, is performed egotistically, and with a lot of effort, is called rajasic action. Actions that are undertaken out of attachment, without consideration of one's capacity, need of resources, consequences, or the impact on others, are called tamasic actions. One who is free from attachment and egoism, endowed with firm resolve and inspiration, and not swayed away by success or failure, is a sattwic doer. A doer who is full of attachment, who craves for results, is greedy and oppressive, whose conduct is not good, and who is easily affected by ecstasy and oppression, is a rajasic doer. Callous, foolish, and arrogant, deceitful, wicked, lazy, depressive, and procrastinating. These are the qualities of a tamasic doer.
So, it's very useful to find yourself in these verses. For example, a doer who's greedy, easily affected by ecstasy, whose conduct is not good, gets excited, gets enthusiastic, is a rajasic doer. What do you mean? Not really thought about yourself being that way, but here you are. Or when you don't give a shit, you're just misbehaving, you're thrashing about, you're doing just what you want to do even though you know you shouldn't be doing it, you're tamas. So it's good to find yourself in these verses. It's useful to begin to recognize how these gunas affect personalities and how those personalities act, and gives you a sense of what you're dealing with. Because if you're trying to convert a tamasic person to a spiritual path, it ain't going to work. Or if you're trying to convert a rajasic person to the spiritual path, it's going to be a lot of work. A sattwic person will be effortless. So it's the nature of knowing what you're working with, the people you're working with, the conditions that you're working with. To be realistic and be effective. Again, this is the idea of understanding how things work so that you can find the trib tab by which the action can most effectively move forward. So there's a contradiction here, because one part of it is this strategic capacity to see and understand. And the other part of it is simply the purity of intent. These both coexist. Okay, continue.
Arjuna, there is a threefold division of intelligence and firmness based on the principles of the three modes of prakriti. The intellect, through which a person is able to know correctly which actions are to be performed and which actions are to be avoided, which situation is the cause of fear and which one is not to be feared, and also which leads to bondage and which leads to liberation, is known as sattwic intelligence. The intellect is rajasic, which does not enable a person to know the right and the wrong, or what is to be done and what to avoid. The intellect, which accepts wrong as right and perceives everything from an opposite angle due to ignorance, is tamasic.
So we should all have a sattwic intellect, right? To know which actions to take and which actions not to take. Wouldn't that be handy? What is it that would allow such an intellect? You will literally have to reside in truth. Because from the sat comes sattva. So it's only when the availability of truth is right there that the capacity of the discrimination of the intelligence to see what it is that needs to be done will be sufficient for meeting the opportunity of the situation. So it's also useful to know what guna you're in before you take action. So if you're in rajas and you're taking action, you're going to be less effective because rajas takes action for taking action. It wants to act, so it will take action even when action isn't appropriate. And tamas doesn't know which way to take action. It takes the wrong action as likely as good as the right action, and doesn't know the difference between the two. So it's good to know when you're in tamas, it's not to make plans. Or when you're in rajas, not to do surgery. If you can find your own gunas, then you can actually learn how to use the cycle, even if you're not yet transcended, even if you're not yet beyond the gunas. You can use your own cycle of gunas for when to get the task done. Sattva's good for the big vision. Raja's good for implementation. Tamas is good for the drudgery, repetitive labor that's required. The thing that has to be done every single day. Okay. Continue.
The unwavering persistence, which enables one to control the mind, the vital system, and the senses, to advance in the path of yoga, is called sattwic firmness. That persistence by which man clings only to material enjoyments and possessions, and craves after the fruits of action, name, fame, power, etc., is called rajasic. The persistence by which an ignorant person refuses to give up laziness, sleep, depression, fear psychosis, hypocrisy, false vanity, and brooding is tamasic firmness.
Okay. So all these descriptions so far have everything to do with action. It has something to do with your ability to perceive what needs to be done, your ability to take the action, the various qualities of the action, the doership, the action itself, and the discrimination required. Now it's talking about the persistence. So some actions need to continue to be done in order to have their effect. In this world of karma, the nature of this dimension is repetition and agreement. Things become real in this dimension when it keeps repeating itself. It persistently comes back into existence, consistently comes back into existence. Every day it repeats itself. And the more it repeats, it gets other things to repeat themselves in the same way, the more real it becomes. So if someone tells you a lie about the nature, or there is no such thing as climate change, right? And you say it enough times, and you get enough people to agree with you to say it as well, then you get this idea comes into existence called there is really no such thing as climate change. That's the nature of this creation. So persistence is one of the very important tools for effecting change in the world, for good or for ill. And what does persistence take? Like all actions, it takes sacrifice. Because you have to do the same thing consistently, continuously. It takes this resolve, a determination, an application of will, a steadiness over yourself and your personality, and a willingness to put up the obstacles and the resistance that arise. So if you look at action, it's not just the action. It's this ability to sustain the action over time. This is, again, perhaps overlooked in the nature of the spiritual path, because without repetitive actions, or what we call good habits, spiritual habits, if we don't have habits counter to the negative habits, then the negative habits win. Because the momentum for the negative habits has already been established. If we stop acting, the negative habits will overtake us. Negative thinking, negative feeling, negative eating, negative talking, negative... So unless we take actions that are counter to that or neutralizes them, they rule. Therefore, we have to persistently take actions that are aligned for what we're trying to create that currently isn't as available to us. So this is the thing to know about on the spiritual path. We have to persistently do our practices consistently over time in order to effect the change needed to bring about the shift in consciousness that we're aspiring for. If we don't, then we will not be able to neutralize the opposite tendencies, which would be to bring us back into a diminished or reduced state of consciousness. So you can't stop ever. Even when you've come to the absolute truth, acts of sacrifice, charity, and austerity. As long as you're in the body, as long as you're in this dimension, you have to take the necessary actions every single day. God, it sounds like a condemnation, right? Put me in jail instead. At least I could be miserable my own way. But that's actually how it is. And you have to draw from another place than your ego. Your ego can't do that. Your ego's not willing to do that. Nor would it be willing to do it for a long time. It would say at some point, well, where's the payoff? How come I'm not enlightened? I've been doing this for 30 years. What's wrong with this? I might as well quit the action. Well, watch what happens. It'll get worse. So this living in a vibrational field or a purposeful field is to be in perseverance. Purpose and perseverance don't both begin with P for no reason. It's because they're related. You're living a purposeful life and your ability to be persistent are direct corollaries to each other. Purpose and persistence. That's how you make the purpose real. And you have to work with what you know. You have to work with what you have. So you can't do a more effective practice than the one you know. But if you continue to do the more effective practice, perhaps at some point a more effective practice will be revealed to you. And you can transfer your loyalties to that practice. Because if you relax, the inclinations of the old nature will take you over until you have become permanently established in the state of consciousness of truth itself. So it's like you're always on duty. There's no off duty. There's no vacation. In one sense. If you're in the process, if your purpose in existence is to manifest something that has not been manifested before, this is what's required. If your purpose is simply to reside in the state of the self or to rest in the ecstasies of your God merger, then there's nothing for you to do. You don't need to follow these instructions or be persistent with anything. All you need to do is stay connected to your own experience. It's only in manifestation. This is the great sacrifice. It's why Christ only did it for 3 years. He was too impatient to hang around for 40. Too hard to persevere 40 years. So he got it all done in 3. Okay, I'll do this, but 3 years, that's it. I'm up. Buddha hung in there longer, but he did die from bad pork, so consequences did sneak up on him. So it's only in the manifestation. We're only talking about that particular aspect. And beings who are able to do that are not drawing from a human source. They're not drawing from the source of energy of ordinary humanity. They're drawing from the evolutionary force, the Satchitananda, such that it's all delight. It's all the expression of itself. A natural unfolding, an original creation. It is not a drudgery. It is always new. The persistence, therefore, is natural because it's what they are. It's integral. It doesn't need to be efforted. It doesn't need to be thought about. It is a natural expression of what they have become. That's the only way chapter 18 is possible. So try not to take this as a measure of how you should be. It will happen spontaneously or not when your journey is complete. To whatever extent your manifestation is to play. So don't use this as a measure of an ordinary spiritual seeker or ordinary human being. This is the Gita is talking about what it takes to be an avatar, what it takes to be a Krishna. Keep that in mind. Okay, I think we can stop here. Did we finish 657? No, it changes. It changes. So we'll complete Yes, I think we're going to be good for 2 sessions. So that's the revelation for today. This chapter is still revealing itself to me. Of all the chapters, this one is an endless unfolding. And there's so much in this chapter that I feel like I've left a lot, so much behind in these verses I've done so far. But there's just no way. There's just no way there's going to be a video of chapter 18 that's going to go into it, the whole thing, because it'll be starting today and for the rest of my life, explaining all the different possibilities. What is manifestation? Ultimately, it's the ultimate sacrifice. That means the ego giving itself over totally to the divine will, and in the process, becoming more and more perfect in its manifestation. More and more effective, more and more capable. And that, in my experience, will only continue for as long as there's a body. And I can see that what's happening for me now is quantum leaps from what was happening for me last year. That things are changing the very foundational structure of the nature of what's occurring and what are the actions and how the subtle planes interact with this plane and how the intentionalities are being expressed and what happens when there's more agreement. The forces that are getting released. All of this unfolding, it's all part of the revelation of the creation to the Creator. It is this endless unfolding. So this is just a hint. Don't try to understand it past what we're doing here at this point. For most of you, almost all of you, it is these other chapters have relevance. This is simply pointing to a possibility that is available for very few to become manifesting channels and instruments into the collective consciousness. We all do it to some extent at any stage of the journey. When you come to the self, there's a natural manifestation that happens for one who's in the self, and the effort and the persistence comes naturally for one who's come to the self. One who's come to Brahman, it's the same thing. One who's come to God, it's the delight of the action in itself. It's the experience of Satchitananda act. So there's no such thing as persistence. There's no such thing as sacrifice or effort. It is the ecstasy of itself expressing into the creation as it is in the absolute truth. So it's not useful to compare this to our ordinary consciousness. Because you'll say, well, not me, I'll never do this. It'll never be possible. But we do need to strive, even if it's hopeless. We have the right to the action, but not the fruit thereof. So the bitch of the thing is if you don't strive, nothing happens. All right. Well, with that, last revelation, we'll finish our program for today. 11 blessings. Om Namo Brahmane Satchitananda Murtaye. Om Namo Brahmane Satchitananda Murtaye. Om Namo Brahmane Satchitananda Murtaye. All glory to Buddha.